side standing on the reformer. Mainly, especially at our studio, we do a lot of side standing, so maybe it gets a little repetitive and people stop thinking about the important things that we should be aware of as we're standing. So even though we stand on our feet on a regular basis, it doesn't necessarily mean that we stand in proper posture. So certain things is where your hips are in space. When doing straight leg side presses, people tend to hang into their hips. So they'll push the pelvis forward and kind of dump into their low back, which we really want to avoid. So as we're doing side standing, we want to think about our pelvis staying nice and neutral, staying with our sit bones shining straight down towards the floor, where if we do hang into our hips, into the front of our hips, our sit bones are slightly hanging forward. And very rarely do people stick their bum out, but it can happen to keep balance. So it could be the length of your press, could be too wide, and if you're tight, it's going to pull you forward. So reducing how far you push the carriage when moving in and out. Also for squats, so there's tons of variations that you can do with squats on the reformer. What I want to go over is stationary squats. So the carriage leg is staying still. So as I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep my carriage foot nice and still. There is tension in my spring, so I have pushed it away from the stopper. I'm not letting it come in when I'm going up or down. The thing that's really noticeable is people's upper body, and it's partially balance, partially mobility, that letting the knees bend and keeping the chest lifted as you go up and down. So you want to think equal weight through the feet. You want to think about sticking your hips back and then pressing through the heels and firing through the glutes on the way up. Trying your best to think about that carriage leg staying nice and still. So commonly, people will slightly bend their knees, so there's not a big knee bend, and then to compensate for depth, they'll bring their upper body forward and reach their arms forward, which changes the movement. When we're going for squats, we are going for a knee bend, so we want to keep the chest lifted. So certain things you can do for adjusting whether you can get that knee bend. Maybe we shouldn't be on an unstable surface, or maybe we need to adjust the resistance. Thinking about sitting back into a chair. So think about reaching your hips back, reaching your sit bones back. Obviously, I don't want to completely shift back or else I'm going to go off my heels. I want to be able to keep the weight into my feet and then control it up. So then we've got our side lunge, where we're focusing on keeping our hip over the platform. So when you bend into the knee, there's two variations you could do with the hip. You could focus on a neutral pelvis, slightly bending the knee forward and trying to keep your pelvis nice and still as you push the carriage in and out. Or you can go more into a squat variation where you send your hips back, still trying to keep that hip over the platform as you move the carriage leg in and out. What you want to avoid is pushing with this leg. So if you notice my hip moved away from the platform and then it comes back over, well, you're not creating that stability, you're not trying to hold that position, and that's what makes the exercise challenging. So we want to think about this hip staying over the platform as you move the carriage leg. That way you don't get any relief in that muscle as much as you want it. That you can do on the reformer is warrior, just like in yoga. So when you take your foot, you want to turn your foot so that you're pointing in the direction that you're going. Your heel lines up with your arch, and your upper body is going to rotate towards the direction that your foot is pointing in. Fingertips can be extended, arms, and you want to think about looking down your center finger as you lunge into your front knee and then resist the carriage back in. So both feet are planted. We don't want to roll into the back foot. We want to make sure that the foot stays planted, mainly for balance so that you don't lose your balance. Press out, lunge into the front knee tracks with the second toe. Eyes are going over the middle finger, keeping the chest lifted, and then control the carriage back in. Exhale, press out, lunge into that front knee, and then resist it back in. So then the last one of that series is skating. So you're gonna push the carriage out and you wanna lunge into your carriage knee. Now I want my body weight over this carriage foot. If I were to let the carriage come in, my body weight's gonna be away. So this is a common thing that people do when they first are trying to get familiar with it and they lose their balance because their feet aren't underneath them. Then you're gonna shift the weight over and then pull the carriage in. So when I press out again, I wanna keep my weight over the foot. Now I wanna keep the carriage still, my body at the same height as I shift over to the platform foot. Then I rise out of that knee and pull the carriage in. Sometimes we get a little bit ahead of ourselves because we're wanting to make it flow, but it's important to get that transfer of weight before you pull the carriage in. Then once you get comfortable, then you can pick up the pace a little bit, but you want to always maintain that hip stability.